There's a moment in every soul's evolution that cannot be rehearsed or bypassed. It does not announce itself with fireworks or celebration. It arrives in silence, often after a breakthrough, precisely when we think we've made it through the darkest part. A moment where the air shifts, the body softens, and for a breathless second, we feel aligned. The fear is gone. The path is open. Something ancient within you nods in recognition. This is the frequency of your future. And then, almost without warning, it hits. Not the kind of fear that announces itself with panic or drama, but a subtler, deeper dissonance. It doesn't come at the beginning, when everything feels uncertain. It comes right after the clarity, right after the meditation that moved you to tears, right after the vision that felt so real it seemed impossible to doubt, right after the yes. Suddenly your chest tightens, your stomach knots, your thoughts race into old spirals. You question if any of it was real. You wonder if you're going backward, but you're not. This is not regression. This is not failure. This is the threshold. The threshold is a sacred space, unmarked, misunderstood, and often mistaken for a warning sign. It is the friction point between who you were and who you are becoming, between the neurological past encoded in your body and the quantum signal you've just begun to stabilize. This is not the end of the shift. This is the proof that it has begun. Most people misinterpret this phase. They assume that alignment should feel effortless, that fear is a signal they're off course, that doubt means something's broken. But in truth, fear at this stage is not an exit. It's an invitation. The presence of fear doesn't mean the leap failed. It means you've actually jumped. Your nervous system is not resisting the future. It's recalibrating its sense of safety. Your identity is not falling apart. It's being restructured. And that trembling inside, that's not your failure. It's your opening. Every transformational process has a moment like this, a silent revolt from the parts of you that were never taught how to hold peace, that were conditioned to expect the collapse after joy, the abandonment after intimacy, the punishment after expansion. When you cross the energetic threshold of a new reality, these parts do not disappear. They awaken. They want to know, are we safe here? Can we trust this? Will we be allowed to stay? This is the space where most people retreat, not because they're not ready, but because no one told them this is normal. No one taught them that the body's resistance is not a betrayal. It is a relic of the life you've outgrown. The fear you feel is not from the part of you that is expanding. It is from the part of you that is dissolving. And in that dissolution, your task is not to run or to fix or to prove. It is to stay, to breathe, to recognize the moment for what it is. A portal. Not just a metaphorical one, but a biological and energetic one. You are not being tested by the universe. You are being asked by your own field of consciousness, can you remain coherent when the signal wavers? Can you hold the truth of your vision even when your cells shake with memory? Can you lead yourself, not with certainty, but with devotion? This is where the real work begins. Not in the moments of insight, but in the quiet after. In the trembling hours when nothing external has changed, but everything internal is rearranging. This is the space between timelines, between breaths, between selves. And it is here, in this sacred threshold, that your transformation is either abandoned or embodied. Let us begin. There is a hidden cruelty in the early stages of expansion, not because life is punishing you, but because the body does not yet know how to interpret what is happening. You feel like something just cracked open inside you. You accessed a future that felt real. For the first time, you weren't just imagining change. You could feel it. It pulsed in your chest, surged through your spine, lingered in your breath. And then, just when the current of trust began to flow, your body collapsed inward. The fear returned. Doubts whispered louder. Old emotions hijacked your nervous system, and a thought arises, quiet but venomous. Maybe I made it all up. This is the moment most people mislabel as failure. But what you are experiencing is not regression. It is resistance, not the kind born of weakness or unworthiness, but the kind born of unfamiliarity. You are not falling backward. You are brushing up against the neurological threshold of who you used to be. That threshold is biological. Your nervous system, finely attuned to past stimuli, begins to protest the expansion. Not because it knows your future is wrong, but because it doesn't yet recognize it as safe. Safety, in the language of the body, is not defined by alignment, joy, or purpose. It is defined by what is known. And for many of us, suffering is what is most familiar. Your body is not your enemy. It is a historian. It remembers every moment you learned not to trust, every time you stepped into hope only to be met with collapse, every instance when peace was punished, when softness was exploited, when stillness was mistaken for vulnerability. It catalogs these moments and encodes them into your physiology. Then it builds thresholds, lines not meant to be crossed. When you begin to align with a reality that transcends those thresholds, the alarm bells ring, your stomach clenches, your heart races, your breath shallows. Not because you're on the wrong path, but because you are approaching the edge of the known map. In the old paradigm, we are taught that fear is a red flag. We are taught that if something feels unsafe, we should stop, turn around, go back. But in the realm of quantum transformation, fear is not a stop sign. It is an indication that you are near the point of identity disintegration, the dissolution of who you thought you had to be in order to survive. This is not a metaphor. Your cells are literally shifting their allegiance. They are beginning to respond to a different signal, a new field of possibility, and in that recalibration, chaos is common. To understand this, we must step into the intersection of neuroscience and consciousness. The human brain, especially the limbic system, is designed to prioritize repetition. Familiar signals create neurological shortcuts. They require less energy, less questioning, less risk. This is the foundation of survival. It is efficient. It keeps you alive, but it also keeps you looped. When you begin to shift your state, when you meditate, when you visualize, when you genuinely begin to believe in a new outcome, you are not just thinking new thoughts. You are laying down new neural pathways. You are asking the brain to wire itself around uncertainty. And the body follows. Not immediately, not gracefully, but eventually. And before it does, it fights. That fight is not spiritual failure. It is spiritual labor. It is the birth canal through which your future self must pass. And like all births, it is messy, primal, and filled with a kind of terror that cannot be intellectualized away. This is the moment when the survival self, built on vigilance and hyper-awareness, begins to panic. It cannot grasp that peace is sustainable. It does not trust that joy can be maintained. It clings to old narratives, not because they feel good, but because they feel predictable. And predictability has always equaled safety. This is where many spiritual seekers lose their way. They interpret the discomfort of this transition as a sign they've done something wrong. They chase the high of initial breakthroughs, mistaking emotional euphoria for alignment. But the quantum field does not respond to emotional spikes. It responds to coherent frequency. And coherence is forged not in the mountaintop moments, but in the valleys of self-doubt, where you choose again and again to stay present even when everything in you wants to run. There is a sacred friction that occurs when your expanding consciousness rubs against your contracting biology. That friction is not something to eliminate. It is something to understand. When your body tenses after a deep meditation, it is not undoing your progress. It is catching up. When your thoughts spiral after visualizing your future, they are not disproving your vision. They are simply trying to reorient to a new gravitational center. That center is not built through force. It is built through presence, through patience, through repetition. You are not being asked to be perfect. You are being asked to stay. Stay when your hands shake. Stay when your mind argues. Stay when your breath shortens. Because every time you stay, you stabilize the signal. And every time you stabilize the signal, you become more compatible with the timeline you've already touched. The illusion of regression is powerful because it mimics collapse. But collapse is not always a step backward. Sometimes it is the nervous system releasing its final grip. Sometimes it is the echo of an old self falling to its knees, realizing it is no longer in charge. Do not mistake the tremble in your body for a warning. It may be your first taste of freedom, and freedom is rarely comfortable at first, because comfort is a habit, and you are unlearning the kind that kept you small. This is not the end of your transformation. It is its beginning. The friction you feel is not blocking the shift. It is the evidence that the shift is already underway. Let it come. Let it move through you. Let the body shiver and shake and question everything. And then, when the tremor passes, return to the still point. It's still there. It always is. You didn't lose it. You met your edge, and you stayed. That is what changes everything. We live in a culture obsessed with control. It teaches us that mastery over life is found through precision, through planning, through managing every outcome so nothing surprises us. Even within the spiritual world, control has disguised itself well, masquerading as manifestation strategies, high-vibe hacks, strict morning routines, and curated visions of enlightenment. We're told that if we can just maintain the right thoughts, the right frequency, the right intention, then the universe will fall into place like clockwork. But alignment is not control dressed in spiritual language. Alignment is something much quieter, much deeper. It is the art of coherence. Coherence is not about perfection. It is about resonance. It is the inner congruence between your thoughts, your emotions, your nervous system, and the field around you. It is what happens when your breath matches your belief, when your posture reflects your presence, when your choices echo the truth of who you've decided to become. It cannot be faked. It is not performative. And most importantly, it does not require you to feel euphoric every moment of the day. One of the most damaging myths of the manifestation world is the belief that a high vibration must always feel good, that if you are aligned, you must always feel peaceful, joyful, open, and confident, that any moment of contraction means you've lost your signal. But alignment is not a mood. It is not an emotional performance. It is not about bypassing discomfort with forced positivity. It is about staying true to your chosen frequency even when fear arises, even when your biology trembles, even when your old story knocks on the door of your nervous system demanding to be let back in. The nervous system does not respond to your vision board. It responds to your chemistry. It reads your internal state through breath, posture, tone, and tension. When you try to force yourself into feeling good, when you shame yourself for feeling off, when you suppress the wave of discomfort in an attempt to maintain control, your system picks up on the incongruence. It notices the tension behind your smile. It senses the tightness behind your affirmations. And instead of stabilizing, it fragments. Not because you are broken, but because you are out of coherence. This is where control fails and coherence begins. To be coherent does not mean you never feel afraid. It means you can hold the fear without collapsing into it. It means you can stay rooted in your chosen signal, even when old emotions pass through like weather. Joe Dispenza teaches that the body cannot distinguish between a thought and a lived experience. When you rehearse fear-based outcomes in your mind, your body responds as if those outcomes are already happening. Your chemistry shifts, your heart rate changes, your breath constricts. This is why staying coherent in the presence of fear is such a radical act. It teaches your body a new truth, that the signal of safety can remain even when the unknown is near. To embody alignment is to allow your nervous system to relearn what safety feels like. Not the safety of certainty or familiarity, but the deeper safety of self-leadership. The knowing that no matter what arises, you will not abandon yourself, that no sensation is too much, that no emotional wave needs to be controlled, only accompanied. This is not an easy shift, especially for those whose survival once depended on being hyper-vigilant, on scanning every room for threat, on bracing for the other shoe to drop. For those who lived through betrayal, chaos, abandonment, or instability, control became the currency of existence. Letting go of that control is not a casual choice. It is a sacred retraining of the entire internal ecosystem. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control your emotional landscape in order to stay aligned, the more incoherent you become. Because control always comes from fear. Fear of feeling, fear of uncertainty, fear of the unknown. Coherence, on the other hand, is born from trust. Not blind trust in the universe, but embodied trust in yourself. Trust that you can stay with yourself through the wave. Trust that you can feel deeply without drowning. Trust that your signal can remain stable even when your sensations fluctuate wildly. This is why alignment often feels like stillness in the middle of a storm. Everything around you might be spinning, your heart might be pounding, your thoughts might be loud, But somewhere inside there is a center that has stopped running. That center is not built by effort, it is built by practice. The practice of noticing without judgment, the practice of staying with the breath instead of the story, the practice of choosing presence over performance. The world does not need more people trying to project perfect energy. It needs more people who are willing to feel honestly, lead gently, and radiate truthfully. Coherence is what the field responds to, not your hashtags, not your vision board, not your fake smile. The field is listening for resonance, and resonance comes from inner truth, from nervous systems that have stopped faking safety and begun practicing it instead. This is not about suppressing chaos. It is about becoming a trustworthy signal in the midst of it. When you stop chasing control and start cultivating coherence, something extraordinary happens. The field begins to reorganize around your stillness. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped fighting yourself. And that is the moment when everything begins to shift. Not when you finally feel perfect, but when you finally feel real. There is a strange paradox at the heart of transformation that most people never expect, and even fewer are prepared for. It is the unsettling realization that peace, true, sustainable peace, can feel terrifying. That joy, when it first enters a system accustomed to pain, can trigger the same biochemical response as danger. That expansion, even when deeply aligned, can feel like collapse. And the reason for this is simple, though not easy. Your body has memory, and that memory is not yet calibrated to the frequency of freedom. We assume fear only arises in response to threat, that if we're afraid, something must be wrong. But this belief overlooks a fundamental truth of trauma physiology. The body doesn't always fear what's harmful. Sometimes it fears what's unfamiliar. And for many of us, what is unfamiliar is not chaos, but calm. Not contraction, but openness. Not rejection, but genuine love. When your nervous system has lived too long in survival mode, bracing, guarding, scanning for danger, it begins to organize its identity around that vigilance. You become the one who anticipates disappointment, the one who prepares for betrayal, the one who shrinks to avoid being seen too clearly. And these adaptations, however painful, keep you safe. Or more precisely, they keep you alive. So when you begin to shift, when you soften into worthiness, when you open to abundance, when you allow yourself to receive what was once denied, your system doesn't interpret it as liberation. It interprets it as risk. This is why so many people begin manifesting their desires only to find themselves self-sabotaging in subtle, unconscious ways. The one calling in deep love begins questioning whether they're worthy of it. The one inviting in wealth starts spiraling into scarcity. The one stepping into visibility feels the pull to disappear. On the surface, it seems irrational. But beneath the surface, something much more intelligent is happening. Your system is running a diagnostic scan, asking, have we been here before? Do we know how to survive this? And when the answer is no, not because the experience is dangerous, but because it is new, the default is fear. This fear is not a flaw, it is feedback. It is information rising from the subconscious layers of your being, telling you that the internal infrastructure is not yet strong enough to hold the new signal. Not because you are not ready, but because the body has not yet been taught how to feel safe inside what is good. The body, after all, is not wired for your dreams. It is wired for your survival. And survival favors the predictable over the preferable. This is not pessimism, it's physiology. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in his research on trauma, writes that the body keeps the score. It stores unresolved experiences not just in memory, but in muscle tone, in hormone patterns, in breath rhythm. So when a new timeline begins to form, when you start to embody worthiness, wholeness, and truth, those patterns surface, not to punish you, but to be repatterned. Here's what most people miss. The presence of fear is not a sign that you're off track. It's a sign that you are crossing an internal boundary you didn't know existed. A boundary between the self you had to become in order to survive and the self you're now remembering is possible. When fear arises, it is not always pointing to danger. Sometimes it is pointing to a place in you that was never taught how to receive what is now arriving. This is where the work of emotional regulation becomes sacred, not as a way to bypass fear, but as a way to walk with it. When you notice your body constricting, when your breath shortens, when your mind begins constructing worst-case scenarios, this is not the time to abandon yourself. This is the time to listen, to pause, to bring presence to the parts of you that are afraid not because they doubt your vision, but because they have never experienced it as safe. You don't need to force yourself into trust. You need to create enough internal stability for trust to emerge. That begins with acknowledgement, with noticing the first whisper of fear and saying gently, "I hear you. I understand why you're here." When fear feels seen, it softens. Not immediately, not always completely, but enough to begin a new conversation, enough to shift from reaction to relationship. Joe Dispenza teaches that when we change our internal state, the body eventually follows, but not without resistance. The body resists not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it is chemically addicted to the emotional states of your past. If stress, shame, or anxiety have been your dominant baselines, your cells are still calibrated to those frequencies. To choose peace in this context is not just a mindset shift, it is a biochemical recalibration. This recalibration does not happen all at once. It happens in moments. Moments when you notice the tension and breathe anyway. Moments when you feel the urge to collapse and choose to stay present. Moments when your body screams for the old loop and you pause just long enough to remember the new path. These are not small acts. They are the micro movements of mastery. They are the signals that teach your system. Peace is safe. Joy is sustainable. Love is not a trap. Eventually, your body begins to believe you. Eventually, the fear that once screamed becomes a whisper, then a breath, then silence. And in that silence, something ancient returns. Not just a new identity, but the memory of who you were before you had to protect yourself from life. You do not need to eliminate fear to be aligned. You only need to stop mistaking it for truth. You only need to stop giving it the final word. Let it speak. Let it rise. Let it tremble through your chest. But do not let it define the meaning of the moment. Because the truth is, your fear is not fighting your future. It is grieving the loss of a past where you had to live without it. Let that grief move. And then return to the breath, to the present, to the field where peace is not a performance, but a new kind of home. There comes a point in every transformation where the resistance shifts shape. It becomes less about the conscious fear of stepping forward and more about the unconscious pull of what you've already lived through. You may not see it coming. You may be deep in meditation, flowing with gratitude, anchored in your new frequency. And then suddenly, the air changes. Your chest grows heavy. Your mind turns against you. Old memories surface not as stories, but as sensations. You feel shame for no reason, guilt for simply feeling good, a subtle grief that coils around your ribs. This is not self-sabotage. This is the body remembering. What rises in these moments are not just emotions. They are echoes, residual fragments of the identities you built to survive. And when you begin to embody a new self, those fragments rise, not to ruin your progress, but to ask a deeper question. Are we allowed to come too? Are we still welcome now that you're becoming more of yourself? Emotional flashbacks do not always announce themselves clearly. They rarely say, "This is from your childhood," or "This is an old story." They show up in the nervous system, in the way your shoulders clench even when you feel safe, in the way your heart races when someone sees you clearly, in the way your voice trembles when you try to speak your truth. You may think you're reacting to the present, but your body is reliving a moment long gone, looping through the past without your permission, flooding your system with emotions that no longer match the life you're choosing to create. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What most people don't realize is that transformation doesn't just reveal your light, it also activates your shadow. The deeper you step into alignment, the more visible your old wounds become. Not because you are broken, but because your rising consciousness brings light to the corners that had been living in darkness for decades. And when the light hits, those parts respond, sometimes with fear, sometimes with anger, sometimes with deep sadness that has no clear source. This is not failure. This is remembering. You are not just creating a new life. You are unearthing the pieces of yourself you abandoned along the way. The version of you that learned to shrink to avoid attention. The one who stayed quiet to avoid punishment. the one who pretended to be fine to keep the peace. These selves are not gone. They're folded into your muscles, your breath, your emotional responses. And when you begin to shift timelines, to speak louder, to receive more, to trust again, they awaken, and they don't come to stop you. They come to be integrated. This is why the quantum leap so often feels like an emotional ambush. You visualize success, and shame whispers that you're selfish. You reach for love, and fear reminds you of every betrayal. You expand into freedom, and guilt creeps in as if you've left someone behind. These aren't signs you're failing. They're signs you're touching the edge of your previous programming. They are the places in you where love hasn't yet been allowed to land. When this happens, most people assume something is wrong, that they've hit an energetic wall, that they've gone backward. But emotional flashbacks aren't regressions, they're portals. And they don't close by pushing through or bypassing what arises. They close through witnessing, through offering presence to the parts of you that were never allowed to speak. This is the sacred role of the conscious self, not to eliminate discomfort, but to hold it with maturity and compassion. When you feel yourself spiral into emotion, pause. When shame rises without a cause, breathe. When your system contracts with a pattern that doesn't match your current reality, do not rush to override it. Sit, listen, ask, what is this part of me still protecting? Often you'll find it's protecting a younger version of you, one that is not wrong, one that is simply scared. The work, then, is not to exile these parts, but to welcome them home, to let them know that you no longer live in the conditions that created them, that your current self has resources, awareness, and presence that the past self never had, that they no longer need to guard the gates because you've become the guardian. When you do this, when you bring coherence to your internal system, you stop leaking energy into internal conflict. You unify, and that unification creates resonance. The quantum field responds not to emotional perfection, but to energetic wholeness. The more of yourself you allow to come with you, the more stable your timeline becomes. Not because you've transcended your past, but because you've stopped pretending it didn't shape you. The shadow is not the enemy of your expansion. It is the part of you that has been waiting the longest to be included in it. And when you include it, not as something to fix, but as something to honor, you become whole. And wholeness is not only magnetic, it is safe, it is sustainable, it is yours. This is the real leap, not into another life, but into another relationship with yourself. A relationship where every part has a seat, where no emotion is rejected, where your coherence is not conditional, but consistent. Because now you are not just shifting, you are leading. And every shadow that once tried to pull you back becomes a witness to your return. Transformation is often imagined as a single sweeping act of will, a decision, a choice, a line drawn in the sand that says never again. But the truth is far more nuanced. Real change is not sustained through intention alone. It is made real, tangible, and livable through repetition, through nervous system alchemy, through the process of shifting not just your mindset, but your physiological baseline so that the frequency of expansion is no longer a temporary peak, but a stable home inside your body. This is the step most people never speak about, because it isn't glamorous, it isn't instantaneous. It doesn't happen in the light of peak experiences, but in the quiet of ordinary moments. When you wake in the morning and your heart is already racing, when you receive a message that unsettles you, when you feel your breath shorten without knowing why. These are the gateways, not because something is wrong, but because something is being revealed. The body is speaking, and it is asking for leadership. The nervous system is not an obstacle to your awakening. It is the vehicle. It holds the key to whether your transformation becomes embodied or stays theoretical. It holds the memory of every contraction you once had to normalize. And because it was shaped in environments where safety was conditional, it still doesn't know how to rest in expansion without bracing for collapse. That is not your failure, it is your inheritance. And now, you are being called to change the inheritance. Regulation does not mean avoiding triggers, it means expanding your capacity to stay present in the face of them. It is the process of making peace familiar, of letting calm become more than a concept. It is the gentle, ongoing retraining of your internal world to stop mistaking tension for readiness and stillness for danger. This is how you begin to unhook from the biochemical addiction to your past. Not by thinking your way into safety, but by teaching your body that it can breathe inside unfamiliar conditions without preparing for loss. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory reveals that the nervous system constantly scans the environment for cues of safety or threat. This scanning is unconscious. It happens through subtle signals, facial expression, tone of voice, posture, internal cues. When the body perceives a lack of safety, it initiates a defense cascade: fight, flight, or freeze. These responses are not mental. They are primal. They were once necessary, but if left unexamined, they become automatic reactions that shape your reality before you ever get the chance to consciously choose. So what does it mean to regulate in the context of quantum shift? It means becoming fluent in the language of your own nervous system. It means noticing the micro signals before they escalate. When your jaw tightens, when your eyes dart without focus, when your breath becomes shallow, that is the moment to return. Not because you're trying to eliminate the response, but because you are choosing not to abandon yourself within it. This is not a performance. It is a practice. It is not about being emotionally unshakable. It is about being emotionally present. When fear arises, when doubt surges, when contraction grips your chest, regulation is the act of staying conscious. It is the refusal to let your biology run the show without question. It is placing a hand on your body and whispering the message it never got to hear. We are safe now. We are expanding, not collapsing. You are allowed to feel this and still move forward. You cannot regulate what you shame. If you judge your fear, if you resent your reaction, if you rush to override the discomfort, you are deepening the internal fracture. But when you bring curiosity to the sensation, when you create space inside the pattern, when you choose to stay instead of escape, that is when the pattern begins to unravel. That is when coherence begins to stabilize. Because coherence is not created in the absence of disruption, it is forged in the middle of it, when you become the still point around which the storm reorients. This is not about spiritual superiority. This is about biological trust. Every time you stay with yourself through a difficult wave, you send a new signal through your system. Safety is no longer synonymous with smallness. That changes everything. Because now, the peace you access in meditation becomes possible in a crowded room. The alignment you felt on retreat becomes accessible in rush hour traffic. The version of you who breathes slowly and deeply under pressure begins to take up residence as your new normal. This is how quantum presence becomes your default. Not by avoiding every trigger, but by expanding your capacity to remain rooted in truth while they pass through. This is nervous system alchemy, not as a one-time act, but as a living devotion. A moment-to-moment agreement with yourself to stay soft where you used to brace, to breathe where you used to bolt, to observe where you used to numb, and every time you do, your field shifts. Not dramatically, but deeply. Not loudly, but lastingly. You begin to walk differently, not because the fear is gone, but because it no longer steers. You begin to respond to life from the center of your coherence, not the edges of your survival. This is the moment when energy stops leaking through hypervigilance, when your timeline stops wobbling, when you begin to be felt by the field as a signal that can be trusted, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. Regulation is the bridge between intention and embodiment. It is the invisible thread that carries you across the gap from who you've been to who you're becoming. It is not a skill reserved for the enlightened. It is the sacred work of anyone ready to live in the reality they once only imagined. And it begins always with one choice: to return, again and again. Not to the old pattern, but to the new center, the one inside you, the one that has always been waiting for you to remember it's safe to arrive. There's a specific moment in the transformation process that doesn't come with warning lights or spiritual fanfare. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet it holds the entire test of your evolution in its hands. It's the moment after the shift has begun, after the insight, the meditation, the alignment, when something small, seemingly insignificant, triggers your old nervous system into alert. A comment, a delay, a memory, a sensation. The body contracts, the mind races, the spiral begins. Not because the work has failed, but because the work is beginning to integrate at the level where it matters most: behavior. This moment is sacred. It is not a backslide. It is the crossing point between theory and embodiment. Most people believe the quantum leap happens during visualization, during the alignment practice, during the download of insight. But the real leap is what you do when life presses on the edges of your new identity and asks, without words, will you hold the signal now? The signal you've chosen to live from, the one born of your future self, is not made real only through high emotion. It is made real when it is tested, not in punishment, but in precision. Life responds to your alignment by offering you chances to embody it. And these chances don't arrive in perfect circumstances. They arrive in stress, in irritation, in grief. Not to pull you off track, but to root your signal deeper into your nervous system. So here you are. Your breath is shallow, your chest is closing, your thoughts are recycling. You recognize the spiral, but this time, something different stirs in you. Not the impulse to control or suppress, but the awareness that this is the work. Right here, right now, you are in the fire, but it's not the fire of destruction, it's the fire of refinement. This is where you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what signal am I transmitting right now? And am I willing to stay with it long enough to transform it? That question doesn't come from the wounded self. It comes from the witnessing self. The self that knows you are not your reaction. The self that knows you are not failing. The self that knows you are in process. And that process doesn't need to be rushed. It needs to be felt. To hold the frequency in moments of breakdown is not about overriding emotion. It is about regulating your relationship to it. Not suppressing, but containing. Not escaping, but breathing. Not pretending everything is okay, but remembering that even this moment belongs. Because breakdowns are not blocks. They are access points. They are portals that open when the old self loses control and the new self hasn't yet fully arrived. And what you do in that space determines what stabilizes next. When you place your hand over your heart and whisper, "We're not going back," it is not because you've figured it all out. It's because you've chosen to stay connected. That choice matters more than you think, because the field is not responding to your perfection. It's responding to your consistency, and consistency doesn't mean never falling. It means learning how to rise from the same center again and again. This is why holding the frequency is not a technique. It's a devotion. It is the moment when you decide repeatedly to return to the signal of who you are becoming, even while your body protests and your past pleads for attention. It is a quiet act of courage to stay coherent inside a storm you once would have escaped from. It is what separates temporary inspiration from lasting transformation. In the language of the nervous system, this is called increasing capacity. You are increasing your ability to remain present with larger emotional waves. You are no longer demanding that the world change to accommodate your peace. You are building a peace that can hold itself, that can stay soft even in chaos, that can anchor you even when nothing outside makes sense. This is how the quantum field begins to reflect your inner stability. Because once you stop collapsing at the first sign of discomfort, the field no longer has to test your center. Once you show up as a frequency that holds even under pressure, life begins to organize around that signal. Not just in energy, but in form. People respond differently. Opportunities land more clearly. The world begins to meet you at the level of your integrity. And integrity, in the quantum context, is not morality. It is vibrational wholeness. It is what happens when your thoughts, emotions, actions, and nervous system agree on who you are now. Not who you used to be, not who others need you to stay, but who you've chosen to become. That coherence becomes a gravitational field. It draws in resonance, it repels distortion, it clarifies timelines. So when the next wave of fear hits, and it will, don't be surprised. Be ready not to fight it, but to breathe with it, to sit beside it like an old teacher, to say, "I see you and I'm staying anyway." In that moment, you are not resisting the fear. You are re-instructing your biology. You are not bypassing discomfort. You are building coherence inside it. And that coherence, that decision to remain, is the foundation of your future. This is not a dramatic moment. It is often a quiet one. A breath taken instead of a spiral followed. a pause instead of a reaction, a small choice that, when repeated, becomes the hinge on which your entire reality turns. You are not failing when you feel the fear rise. You are being initiated, not into survival, but into sovereignty. And that initiation begins every time you choose to stay in frequency when every part of you wants to flee. You are learning how to be a transmitter, not just a seeker, a stabilizer of timelines, not just a student of them. And in doing so, you become trustworthy to the future you've seen. Not because you chase it, but because you can hold it. It is tempting to believe that transformation means leaving your old self behind. That to step into the new timeline, you must sever all ties to the pain, the fear, the defense mechanisms, and the versions of you that coped instead of thrived. But this idea, while alluring, is a distortion, because in the quantum field, nothing is wasted. No part of your experience is discarded. Wholeness is not created by elimination, but by inclusion. True evolution is not transcendence of the shadow. It is the reconciliation of it. It is the realization that the shadow was never your enemy. It was your armor. And now that you no longer need to fight, the armor is asking to become part of the signal. Integration is the sacred work of turning the fragments into fuel, of honoring the very parts of you that were once dismissed as broken or backward. The you who dissociated to survive. The you who kept quiet to stay safe. The you who learned to please, to hide, to perform. These selves were not wrong. They were resourceful. They developed inside of systems that could not hold your truth, and they protected you with everything they had. Now, as you open to expansion, they're not fighting your growth. They're asking whether it's safe to come along. This is where most people misinterpret inner resistance. They assume it means they're blocked or unworthy. But in reality, resistance often signals the presence of an outdated survival pattern trying to find its place in a new ecosystem. It doesn't need to be punished, it needs to be reparented. Not with force, but with presence. Not with rejection, but with remembrance. Quantum alignment does not require you to be clean of contradiction. It asks only for coherence, the inner agreement that you are safe enough to include your complexity. Imagine your being as a layered field of frequencies. Your desires transmit one signal, your beliefs another, your nervous system yet another. If those signals are split, the field around you reflects incoherence. But when they begin to harmonize, when your nervous system stops running from your desire, when your subconscious stops contradicting your conscious vision, the field responds not with confusion, but with clarity. That clarity becomes reality. This is why shadow work is not separate from manifestation. It is the invisible architecture that allows your new timeline to land. The vet nut, the emotional fractures you once tried to hide, are not proof of weakness. They are openings. In physics, pressure concentrates at points of fracture. In spirituality, those fractures are portals. They are where light enters, where energy concentrates, where new choices become available. Every time you meet it with presence, you walk through that door. This is what most people miss when they try to leap too fast, too cleanly, too completely into a new self-image. They aim for perfection and wonder why it collapses. But the collapse isn't failure. It's disintegration of a self built on rejection. Wholeness doesn't rely on suppression to function. It includes the parts that shake, the parts that doubt, the parts that once betrayed you in order to survive. So when the old emotion rises, when the inner critic returns, when the grief resurfaces, pause before labeling it as sabotage. Ask instead, is this part of me simply looking for permission to come home? Because if your transformation requires you to exile your past selves, it is not true transformation, it is spiritual gentrification, a cosmetic overlay on a foundation that remains cracked beneath the surface. And cracked foundations cannot hold quantum timelines. The leap you're making is not measured by physical distance. It is measured by the degree of inner consent. Are all parts of you ready to go? Or is a part still frozen in a memory, bracing for abandonment? The further you go in your external vision, the more essential it becomes to carry your inner world with you. Not as baggage, but as witness, as fuel, as encoded proof of the terrain you've already crossed. Integration does not slow you down. It stabilizes you. It roots your new frequency in the soil of your humanity. It makes you trustworthy to the version of yourself that no longer has to perform, fix, or prove. It allows you to walk into the unknown not as a fractured projection of your highest self, but as a coherent embodiment of it. So let the shadow come. Let it sit beside you. Let it whisper, let it shake, let it remember, but do not let it drive. Instead, wrap it in your presence. Anchor it in your breath. Show it the new coordinates. Not by force, but by consistency. The same consistency you are now offering to the field. Because in the quantum, everything belongs. And the more of you that belongs to yourself, the more magnetic your signal becomes. You do not need to become someone else to manifest your future. You only need to become whole. And wholeness is never sterile. It is vibrant, dynamic, layered. It pulses with every frequency you've ever lived through and now claim without shame. The shadow does not hold you back. It holds the missing pieces. And when you integrate them, the signal that emerges is not just powerful, it's unmistakable. It tells the universe, I am no longer trying to outrun myself. I am home. I am whole. I am ready. There comes a moment in every path of awakening when you realize that you are no longer simply absorbing knowledge, no longer trying to get it right, no longer reaching outward for signs that you are on track. You are no longer the student asking the universe for proof. Something within you has shifted, not in volume, but in depth. You are no longer trying to embody alignment. You are embodying it. You are no longer seeking a signal. You are becoming one. This is the transition from learning to living, from following energy to generating it, from being a hopeful observer to becoming a transmitter. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It doesn't require a title, a platform, or even certainty. It only requires presence, but not just any presence, quantum presence. A presence that is so internally anchored, so vibrationally coherent, that it begins to alter the field around you without effort or performance. A presence that leads. To lead yourself does not mean you are free from fear. It means you are no longer governed by it. You may still feel uncertainty rise, but it does not hijack your breath. You may still sense contraction, but you do not collapse into it. You recognize that the terrain of uncertainty is no longer foreign. It is familiar, navigable, even sacred. It is the womb in which all real transformation is conceived. And because you've made peace with not knowing, the field begins to reflect your trust. This is the hallmark of quantum presence. You are no longer negotiating with the universe from scarcity. You are no longer asking, am I worthy, with every intention you set. You are no longer trying to convince life to meet you halfway. You understand now that the universe is not waiting for you to prove yourself. It is waiting for your signal to stabilize. And once it does, it responds. In the old paradigm, we believed we had to ask for permission. Permission to grow, to receive, to rest, to be seen. We thought the quantum field was a kind of spiritual gatekeeper, weighing our worthiness against some cosmic metric. But in truth, the field is not judgmental. It is reflective. It listens not to your words, but to your frequency. Not to your hope, but to your coherence. And when your inner frequency becomes consistent, congruent, grounded, you stop being a seeker and start becoming a reference point. You become someone the field can organize around. Not because you are special, but because you are stable. Not because you are perfect, but because you are no longer abandoning your own signal when things get uncertain. This is the difference between manifesting from desire and manifesting from embodiment. One says, I want this, but I don't know if I can hold it. The other says, this is who I am, and I'm no longer negotiating with doubt. This shift is subtle but profound. It is the energetic equivalent of standing still while everything else is in motion. It is what makes you trustworthy, not just to the universe, but to yourself. Because when you no longer require external confirmation to stay anchored, you've reclaimed your center of gravity. You've moved from reactivity to resonance. Quantum presence is not about dominating reality. It is about becoming such a stable vibrational field that reality has no choice but to respond in kind. And that response is not always instant. It may not come in the form you expect, but it will come, because the field cannot ignore clarity. And when your clarity is not performative, but embodied, not reactive, but rooted, you become magnetic in ways that no visualization technique can manufacture. This is the final test of trust. Can you lead yourself even when the outcome isn't clear? Can you hold the frequency when the evidence lags behind? Can you be the signal even when the world offers static? If the answer is yes, even whispered, even shaky, then you are no longer trying to shift your timeline. You are already living inside it. You've become the anchor point. And from that anchor, everything begins to realign. You are no longer the one waiting for the door to open. You are the frequency that opens doors, not because you force them, but because you carry the code that unlocks them. This is the path of quantum leadership, not leading others, but leading energy, beginning with your own. You do not have to be certain to be powerful. You only have to be present. And if you can stay present through the tremble, through the static, through the silence, then your presence will carry more than just light. It will carry gravity. It will carry the future. When we speak of quantum leaps, we often imagine an event, sudden, expansive, luminous, a clean break from the past, a dazzling arrival into a new life. And yet, the real leap is rarely that cinematic. It is not a single moment, but a quiet series of returns. Not a final destination, but a deepening into self. The leap does not occur when you visualize a new future. It occurs when you begin unraveling the unconscious layers that once kept that future at arm's length. And you meet each one with presence instead of resistance. This is where the theory ends and the embodiment begins. To embody is not to recite affirmations with perfect conviction or maintain an uninterrupted high vibration. To embody is to become congruent. It means that your nervous system, your breath, your choices, and your subconscious expectations begin to align, not just with what you want, but with who you've decided to become. It means that your vision is no longer just in your mind. It is living in your cells. It is echoed in your posture. It is etched into how you respond when nothing goes as planned. And this is what most people miss in the pursuit of quantum change. They chase the frequency of their future without realizing that the true shift happens in the space between attempts, in the return, in the small, unspectacular moments when you catch yourself bracing and choose to soften, when you catch your thoughts spiraling and choose to breathe, when you remember even for 3 seconds that you are not the story trying to replay itself. You are the awareness reclaiming authorship. This is not glamorous work. It is not always blissful. It does not always feel like progress, but it is sacred. Because each return to presence builds coherence. Each choice to meet discomfort with honesty instead of performance rewires the signal you emit. And when that signal stabilizes, your reality begins to shift. Not because the field has finally decided to bless you, but because you have become the kind of presence that the field cannot ignore. You are not being asked to become flawless. You are being asked to become honest. That's what the field responds to. Not your spiritual resume, not your productivity, not your efforts to appear healed. What moves energy, what shifts timelines is radical congruence. When who you are inside begins to match the vision you've been holding outside. Despite the noise, despite the fear, despite the imperfections, this is what grounds manifestation in reality. Not just visualizing a new future, but training your system to remain open enough to receive it, steady enough to hold it, coherent enough to sustain it. It's easy to say, "I'm ready" in meditation. It's harder to say, "I'm ready" with your breath when the old trigger flares, when the past knocks again, when silence stretches out longer than you'd prefer. But it's in those harder moments that the leap solidifies, not with drama, with devotion. Because the truth is, the leap you are making is not across space. It is across vibration, and vibration is not changed by thought alone. It is changed by frequency, and frequency is forged in consistency, in how often you return, in how gently you guide yourself back, not with punishment, not with shame, but with understanding. The leap becomes real when you stop needing to prove that you're there and simply begin acting as if you already are. When your decisions reflect a deeper truth than your doubts. When you move from being someone seeking the next sign to someone who is now the signal. That shift is not a performance. It is a surrender. It is what happens when you no longer seek control but offer coherence. So if you feel like nothing has changed, if the vision is clear but the ground beneath you still trembles, know this. You are not failing. You are folding the invisible into the visible. You are creating a timeline not with force, but with fidelity. Fidelity to the truth that you do not need to be perfect to be aligned. You only need to be here, fully, repeatedly, lovingly, now. Because the leap was never a single jump. It was always 1,000 returns to the same frequency until that frequency became who you are. In the end, the most sacred act is not reaching for the next breakthrough. It is returning, again and again, to the signal of who you truly are beneath the noise. Not as a new performance, but as a remembering. You are not chasing evolution. You are being returned to yourself through every tremor, every breath, every choice to soften instead of collapse. This is the truth that so often goes unnoticed in the pursuit of change. Your highest self was never waiting in the distance. It was always here, beneath the layers of contraction, beneath the coping, beneath the survival. You do not need to become anything other than coherent. And coherence is not built through force. It is built through return. You return when you catch your thoughts spiraling and pause. You return when your nervous system floods with old panic and you breathe into the center of it. You return when your chest tightens and instead of fighting it, you place your hand there and say, "I'm still with you." These are not small acts. These are sacred rituals. They are not dramatic, but they are deeply disruptive to the old code that told you you had to fix yourself to be worthy. What you are doing each time you return is not just regulating a moment. You are reclaiming your timeline. You are stepping back into vibrational authorship. You are no longer living in reaction to your past. You are radiating from a center that knows how to lead energy rather than chase it. You are not asking for permission from the universe. You are showing the universe, through your coherence, how to meet you. The difference between those who collapse and those who cross is not perfection. It is devotion. A devotion to presence, a devotion to breath, a devotion to returning even when it would be easier to numb, to escape, to perform. The moment you understand that your worth is not conditional upon staying regulated, but that your regulation is an act of self-love, you stop performing alignment and begin embodying it. So when the next wave of fear comes, and it will, you will not be surprised. You will not believe it means something is wrong. You will breathe. You will remember. You will return. And each time you do, the foundation under your feet becomes a little stronger, a little quieter, a little more trustworthy. Because you have stopped abandoning yourself. And that is the frequency that shifts everything. You were never here to master control. You were here to practice trust. And trust is not passive. It is a living relationship with the present moment. It is the ability to remain rooted in who you are, even when the winds of fear howl louder than before. It is not the absence of fear, but the deep knowing that fear is no longer the one who decides where you go next. So take this final breath not as a goodbye, but as a homecoming. Let it anchor you. Let it remind you that the path ahead is not unknown to your soul. It is a path you've always known, because it leads back to your essence. And if this message has met you in a space where something old is ending and something new is emerging, then let this be your confirmation. You are not behind, you are not broken, and you are not too late. You are already in motion. You are already shifting, and the leap is already unfolding from within you. If this transmission resonated with the deeper part of you, the part that has always remembered, even when the mind forgot, then stay with this space. Subscribe to continue the journey. Share this message with someone whose signal is ready to stabilize. And above all, keep returning, because returning is not a retreat. It is the ritual that turns remembering into reality, and that reality is yours now.